Okay, so let's do this indentation error exercise. So I opened up in Atom whitespace.py. I created that file, saved it on the desktop. As we see here, our comment has the pound sign. That's whitespace.py. Okay, so now let's just type this exact code here. So this is error below the line, and then we're gonna one space. Right value is I, and then this is gonna be normal. And let's just mix it up just to see. We've got double quotations that use single quotations, even though they have both single. Just to see. And to burn this stuff in my brain. So I can just always try to remember. So mixing stuff up sometimes can be helpful, especially when you're just getting started. You know, I'm still very green, and I want to make sure that I'm pretty solid with the fundamentals. So okay, so we've done the little. So this should come up in error with regards to this line right here, line 5. Indentation error, unexpected indent. So let's try it out. Let's open our terminal, and we're gonna run it. So I have to make sure I'm at my desktop, because that's where I save the file. So here's my desktop, and then I'm gonna do Python 3. Because I have Python 2 on here as well. So Python 3, and then whitespace.py. Right, that should work. And that should run whitespace.py. And there it is. So line 5 is our error, and it says indentation error, unexpected indent. So that's exactly what we expected to come up. This is what Swaroop is talking about here. And so it's important to keep that in mind, that the syntax of the program is invalid, i.e. the program is not properly written. So we can't arbitrarily, just like haphazardly, somewhat randomly start new blocks of statements, except for the default main block, which you have been using all along, of course. So he's going to talk about this later on in chapters such as control flow. So use 4 spaces for indentation is what he recommends. It's the official Python language recommendation. And good editors automatically do this for you. I really like Atom, Sublime Text, etc. There are a lot of other great Emacs, Vim. I mean, there are a lot of great tools, and everyone has their own opinions. But yes, and mine might change. So we're going to move on to more interesting stuff, such as control flow statements, and be sure to become comfortable with what you have read in this chapter. And so we're going to do operators and expressions. Now, most statements, which are logical lines that you write, will contain expressions. A simple example of an expression is 2 plus 3. So now we're going to go back to what I want to do. So I'm going to actually go to our Python shell. Because especially for expressions, the Python shell is, I believe, more apropos than, perhaps an actual program like Atom, for example. So it's just easier to see. So 2 plus 3, right, and then 3 times 5. So here are the available operators, plus, right, and then also P plus P, right, and then P. Now let's try double and single. right? So we've got single quotation in this P, and then the double. You can still do it. That's really cool. Now let's get a little bit more creative. It's not going to work. I know it's not going to work. I know it's not going to work. But we'll try it anyways. Yeah, it's not going to work. Right? So, but it's interesting though. You can do the single quotation plus the double quotation character. Right? So there's plus, minus, the same thing here, right? You can do 9 minus, 98. That's a negative number. Integers, right? You could do 9.8 minus 9.9. And it's basically -1. But this goes all the way out, a whole bunch. We're obviously going to learn how to round and truncate and all that stuff using Python. But this is the default. Doing 9.8 minus 9.9. And obviously, LA or la times 3 is la la la. Right, so there, but then la plus 3, what do you think is going to happen? You're probably right. It's an error because you can't concatenate different data types, right? So you can't concatenate a string and with an integer because it doesn't understand you. It's saying what you want to add this to 3. If you wanted to add the string la plus the string 3, whether we're using double or single, we probably should use double quotes like all the way throughout if we're going to use them, and that way, or single, etc. Make that choice. So now it makes sense, right? And if you want, wherever you want to put the space, you could do la plus 2 spaces plus 3, right? Or you could put the space here, right? And then you're going to get the same thing as before. It's just, the decision. You can also have an integer. And you can call this P, or let's call this S for space. We'll call it S2. That's two spaces, right? 2 spaces. And then you're going to do la plus S2 plus 3. Now this should work because S2 is assigned a data type of string. In fact, if we were to type in type of S2, it's a class of string because it is assigned, or it gets the string of the 2 blank characters. So I kind of stepped off the beaten path a little bit to explain that, but going back to his book, he's talking about plus, minus, multiply, right? So if we're going to multiply, which we've been doing, right? 9 times 99, 891, and then power. So 8 to the power of 2. What do you think that is? It's 8 squared, right? Which is 64. So it returns x to the power of y. Well, what about 64 to the 1/2, the 0.5? That is going to be 8, right? Square root of 64. And it's going to be if we have an integer, and then also to the power of a decimal, our answer is going to be in decimal form. Well, let's try this. 64 to the 1/2. Now that, because here's what's interesting. This is why you got to keep in mind, PEMDAS, which you remember, right? Parenthesis, exponent, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. And you want to make sure that you're setting up the math correctly, even though we're not going too crazy here now. But so 64 to the 1/2 power is supposed to be 8, right? Because 64 to the 0.5 was 8. But how can we do that? Well, it did 64 to the first power, which is 64, and then divide that by 2, which is 32. So it didn't understand that. So how do we fix this? You could be right. And if you said put a parenthesis, I mean, there are multiple ways, but this is one of the ways, is to just put a parenthesis around the 1/2. So the compiler is going to evaluate 1/2, or the interpreter evaluates 1/2. And then it says, okay, 64 to the what power? And then it takes 1/2 and sticks it in there. It doesn't do 64 to the first power and then divide by 2, because PEMDAS, it's in order, right? Parenthesis, right? Exponent. This is an exponent. This is an exponent. This is power. And then multiplication, then division. So now we should have 8.0. Yes, so 8.0. Excellent. Hopefully that makes sense. And we're going to do divide x by y. So we'll do his examples, right? 13 divided by 3. And notice that in Python 3, it gives you all the way out a whole bunch of numbers. It's not rounded. It's not floored. It's not ceilinged. It just gives you that exact, not exact, but very close to exact, like all the way out, multiple places. It looks like 16, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I think 15 plus that. Yeah, I think it's 15 places, but that's a lot. And then so here is divide and floor. So this will be the last thing we're going to work on in this video, is going to be 13 with 2 is going to be divide and floor. So 13 divided by 3 is 4 point something, right? So it's going to truncate that decimal, and whatever's past it, it's just going to truncate it, cut it off, and then all we have left is 4. So it's divide and floor. Divides first, and then cuts off the decimal, so whatever's left. So 4.2 goes down to 4. That's why they call it floor, because we're going down to the bottom integer. Because it's going to be between 2 integers, right? Between 4 and 5. So we're going to floor it. It's going to go to the bottom integer, which is 4. Right, and then negative 13 divide and floored 3, right? Negative 13 divided and floored by 3 is going to give us, well, negative 13 divided by 3 is going to be negative 4 point something. Well, negative 4 point something is between what? 2 integers? Negative 4 and negative 5. Not negative 4 and negative 3. Negative 4 and negative 5. I know, a lot of fun math stuff. But I have seen a lot of videos where the educator and just people that have a very strong background in computer science for many years are stating unequivocally that you don't have to be a math whiz, but you do have to, to do well in programming and whatnot. But you do have to know the basics, and it definitely helps, especially if you're doing, more heavy duty. I don't want to say heavy duty, but like back end programming. But yeah, I mean, you want to ask someone that's got a lot more experience than I do about that, like those specific distinctions. But I'm just trying to understand this, and this is basic algebra. But sometimes people need a refresher, so we'll go over this briefly. So negative 13 divided by 3 is going to be 4 point something, right? It's actually 4.3 with a bar over it, as we see here, right? Divide by. So it's going to be it's not going to be between negative 3 and negative 4. It's going to actually be between negative 4 and negative 5. So then you floor it. Well, what's a smaller number? Negative 4 or negative 5? If you said negative 5, you're absolutely correct. Okay, so this is probably super easy for a lot of you, but I just wanted to go over it regardless. All right, so 9 divide and floor by 1.81. This will be the last one we'll do. Is going to be 4.0. Because 9 divided by 0.81 is going to be 4 point something, right? And then we're going to, but here's a caveat, is that it's going to be floored to but the data type is still going to be a float. And you can use this data in whatever your output is for your program. So a lot of this stuff we're not going to necessarily know, like, oh, what do I need this for, or why is this specific thing that important? And just having faith that, like, once you're building programs that users are using, end users and whatnot, whatever type of programming that you're doing, you're going to want that display to be in a certain data type or format. So this is just saying, look, if you use a float, the default that Python 3 outputs is going to be a float, right? Now, if we did 9 by 18, it's just going to be 0, because it's going to be between 0 and 1. It's going to be some decimal between 0 and 1. Actually, the decimal is 0.5. And then we go down to 0. But if we were doing 9 and then 18.0, what do you think? And this is another thing that I try to do, is like guess the output. So I'm just going to guess. So I would guess it's going to be 0.0. And you probably would as well. But that's a good practice. It keeps your brain sort of enjoying it, and just from a learning perspective, I really enjoy that. And then if I'm wrong, then I get reminded, okay, I'm wrong, and here's why. Oh, I was wrong. But it keeps your brain active as you're learning this kind of new fun stuff. So I think it's 0.0. Yeah. So it goes to, if they're integers, the output's an integer. But if it's an integer and a float, then the output's going to be a float or a decimal. Thank you very much.